Hi, this is Alex from Adult Services, and welcome to Hobby a Month Woodworking. In today's Hobby a Month video, I'm going to discuss some of my favorite woodworking projects that I worked on over the years and provide some resources. One of the first projects that I could recall was back in the late 1990s. I was actually at an antique mall in Amana, Iowa, and I came across two really neat metal wheels. And I thought to myself, boy, that would be really neat if I could buy those wheels. They were actually really cheap. It was like under $20 for both of them. And we ended up bringing them home. And then I was talking to my dad and mom about it, and we were thinking, well, what can we build with it? And we came up with the idea of let's build a cart. So we built a cart in the 1990s. We painted it green and yellow. Then we remodeled it a little in 2005, just redesigned it a little bit just to make it a little more sturdier because the original cart was starting to fall apart. Wood over time being outside will rot, so just keep an eye on that. You might have to rebuild parts of it. And then finally in 2013, we ended up repainting it again. So it went sort of back to the original green that it was back when I built it in the 90s. And then we ended up painting the wheels a red. So now it's used for planters and decorations. So some of the tools that I used during the project was a table saw for a lot of the long cuts, a power miter saw to do some of the 90-degree cuts, two wheels. We needed something for the axle, so a PVC pipe or a long metal rod was used to actually create the axle for the cart. And a lot of that you can get at your local hardware store. We definitely used a tape measure a lot because you have to do a lot of measurements to make sure that everything's balanced, that you use the wood the most efficient way. So you definitely do a lot of measuring squares and rectangles and even like some of the decorative parts. Like I'm looking back at my remodel of 2005. I had some curved cuts, which actually the curved cuts I used the power miter saw to make like angle cuts to make it a little bit fancier. So and I may have also used at a couple points, just different measurements. So that was good. Then we had definitely the T-square was nice because the T-square allows you to line up the ruler on the wood and then you could draw a straight line. So that's really nice to use. I prefer drywall screws of different types. So when we were using different power drills, we use drywall screws, drill bits, and then regular screws and washers. I like those over nails. They seem to last a lot longer. They're a lot sturdier. When you put it together, it just seems like the wood really binds together very nice. So sometimes when you're putting the wood together, you have to drill a pilot hole first, and then you end up putting a little bit bigger hole with the screw in there because you don't want the wood to split. So always keep that in mind. So when I went through it, I assembled it with screws. I had an assortment of lumber. Again, some of it we had to buy, some of it we ended up using recycled lumber that we just saved over the years. We were doing different woodworking projects on the house, and we always came across extra wood, or sometimes we just end up finding wood that was being donated or being thrown out. So we just started collecting wood over the years. So always keep that in mind. You could always go to different places to find cut-offs of wood, and then you repurpose it. So a lot of my projects on woodworking are repurposed materials, and a lot of very inexpensive. So this was one of the ones that I worked on, building a cart, and I really enjoyed working on that project. So one of the projects that I worked on was building a birdhouse in 2015. So this was actually based off of an instruction kit that I bought down in Tennessee. And then when I got home, I ended up then going through the instructions to figure out what kind of wood I needed. So then I ended up either purchasing or repurposing wood that we had. I ended up using drywall screws, the table saws, the power miter, the power drill, definitely tape measure, and then the T-square. And then I built it. And then I then was deciding, well, what do I want to do with the actual birdhouse? So I ended up placing it onto a ladder. I ended up finding a ladder at an antique mall or a flea market, and then I put that onto the top of the I put the birdhouse, attached it to here, and then I found these really neat metal hose parts that I actually attached to the ladder, and then I was able to put that have it freestanding. So that was kind of a neat birdhouse project. The second birdhouse that I built was just a more standard birdhouse. I also used a drill, to drill the hole. There's a special type of drill bit that you use to drill the hole of the birdhouse. So I assembled it with drywall screws, painted it, And then again, there was a feed bin that I ended up buying from somewhere in Illinois. I think I was on my way to Sandwich, Illinois, and there was somebody having a yard sale, and they were getting rid of this feed bin, and I thought this would be perfect. So I bought that, and then when I bought it, then I actually also bought some other like metal implement things to attach to it. So then I assembled it, and then I had a birdhouse on top of a metal feed bin that's freestanding, and then I planted plants in it every year. So it was another good way to repurpose something. And then finally, a little project that I worked on was I worked on this little birdhouse. It was a covered bridge. It's more of a decorative one. I don't think really birds actually lived in it, but it just looked kind of neat. And then we had a tree that needed a birdhouse or something on top of it, so we ended up drilling it to the tree branch that was taken down, and then it was able to be presented in the garden. So that was another project I worked on in 2015. Okay, one of my favorite projects that I worked on was back in the fall of 2015. This is the first time that I actually used a new type of tool called a scroll saw. My dad had actually bought one of those. And the neat thing about a scroll saw compared to like a table saw or a power miter, good for like bigger cuts, table saw for bigger cuts, but the scroll saw, what's nice about that is it allows you to get more detailed in sort of carving out the wood. So when I was building the turkey, I wanted to use the scroll saw to actually make the feathers. So I have them at different shapes and sizes now, and also making the head and then the feet. Now, one thing I noted with the scroll saw you have to be extremely careful with is when you're actually carving the wood, keep in mind, depending on the thickness of the wood, you want to be sort of delicate, because if you end up and know where your saw is actually going, because a couple times I've actually got the blade stuck into the wood and then it broke the saw. So I mean, it's very fragile. It does a great job with detail, but it is something to be aware of when you're actually working on the scroll saw and rotating your work. Always know where the blade is and try to go with the blade and not force it. And if you get really stuck, stop it and then try to slowly back it out. But I was able to carve out the turkey, the feathers, the head, the feet, and then I used a long piece of wood for the actual stake. I used drywall screws to assemble it, a power drill, and then it was painted when it was all done. So it turned out really nice. Now, with this, there was a PVC pipe we actually used into the ground, and then we actually assembled the the stake to go into that. So it's nice to have, because then you're not like just pounding the wood stake directly into the ground, because sometimes the ground could be hard and you'll end up breaking your wood. So you do the PVC pipe first, pound it in the ground with like a big mallet, and then put the stake in there, and then you can take it in. Plus you could take it in and out throughout the year during the weather too. Certain times of the year I didn't want to leave it out during the winter time. But this was a really neat project. And one thing I really liked about a lot of these projects that I want to mention is it's a family, sort of like a family project. So like I work together with my parents. I know my dad taught me a lot of different skills. We worked together on a lot of the woodworking, the planning. My mom always helped out with the painting because she loves to paint. She taught me some things about how to paint, painting techniques. So it was always a really great family activity. So I would highly recommend, talk to your parents or talk to your family and friends, because you can definitely work together on these projects. And I mean, it goes a lot faster, but it's also kind of fun. You're doing something together and then when you're all done, you're really happy about like what the outcome was. So I learned a lot just from talking to my parents, and they had definitely helped me out with these projects too. So, and I was always happy about it. It always turned out really good. So that was my wood turkey of fall 2015. One of my favorite projects that I worked on. Well, actually, myself and my family worked on, so it was really cool. Okay, so a project that I worked on back in 2016, we created this log chair. So we had this really neat wash tub that we bought either at a flea market or antique mall. Again, our family goes out to a lot of different antique malls and flea markets, and we come across a lot of neat stuff. So we found this really neat wash tub, and we thought, let's build something we can put it on top of. So we had a lot of different logs and tree trimmings that we had from a tree we took down, and we ended up, measuring everything out using the tape measure. Used a lot of drywall screws, and then sanding, and then we created this chair. So you could see like there's cross beams, and then we ended up measuring out the legs, and then we set then, once it was all done, set the wash tub on there, planted plants in there, and then added some other decorations that we had, that we bought. And then my mom actually painted something on the back, which was really cool. So we actually came up with a really neat platform for this planter and then decorations. Another neat thing is I found a wheel. And you know what's ironic is this particular wheel I bought in the 1990s, around the same time that I bought the two wagon wheels. Probably was in Iowa also. I don't remember. It was one of the antique malls, but anyhow, it sat for years. I didn't know what to do with the wheel. Now that one actually already had an axle, which was kind of neat. So we were able to like attach it with wood, build the wheelbarrow, attach it to the wheel, paint it. Now the other neat thing that we have is we have, I found this ox yoke. So I built these two wooden structures and then added a little, I carved out a little holder, and then we set the ox yoke on top of it. But what's nice about this ox yoke is then it has these metal loops. You can actually hang planters from them, or you can hang decorations. One thing I want to note, I just want to go back to the beginning. So you can see how, like, in the title screen here, we actually had we had these bats that we created, and these planters. So we were hanging plants and decorations from it. So it actually, you can repurpose it for different seasons, which is kind of neat. So anyhow, getting back to the wheelbarrow, that was a really interesting project too, and I was feeling a little bit more comfortable. Now the thing is, I did start to use a little bit more like carving. I think I may have used a little bit of scroll saw. Also, there's like a saber saw. There's like certain saws you can use that actually allow you to round off the wheelbarrow to make it a little bit more decorative. And the handles too. We had to buy like handles and then you know, sand them. Yeah, that's another tool that it's really good to use. Anything like sandpaper or sanders with anything wood, you don't want to get splinters. So make sure that you include that. So that was a fun little project that we worked on back 2015, 2016 timeframe. Now we're going back to spring 2021. It was a repurpose rebuild project. We had some old fence. And first of all, I want to talk about the one on the left, the white fence. That actually was my grandfather's old garden fence. So it meant a lot to our whole family. And we wanted to rebuild it and attach at least part of the fence back to something we built a couple years ago. So anyhow, we found the old fence. We ended up recutting it to a certain height, resanded everything, and then attached it with drywall screws. And what I actually attached it to is, we made a potato bin a couple of years ago actually with PVC pipes. So that was not only a fence, but also it sort of adds as a piece of decoration for like a vegetable garden that we have, a raised flower bed. Then we needed a fencing at the end of our property to be able to keep like the plants in and then like the weeds out. So we actually went to it was like a roof place or some sort of construction place that was getting rid of, and they you know, free old fences that were, you know, ripped apart and they weren't going to use them anymore. So we ended up taking those pieces of fencing, and then we sawed it down, get rid of all the rotted spots. Then we attached everything using stronger drywall screws rather than nails, and then we repainted it. So it actually turned out really nice. We were able to repurpose something that was actually already being thrown out, and then we just redesigned it. So not every project was from scratch. Some woodworking projects you'll find you'll be planning it from start to finish, and then there'll be other times where you'll end up getting something that's already pretty much pre-built, and then you're just going to remodel it or redesign it a little bit to make it better than what it was, and then repurpose it. So again, that was a project I worked on in the spring 2021. Okay, so one of the projects that I worked on in 2017 called the Woodland Creature Painting Craft, we actually had this as a program in person at the library. This was back in 2017. So I found some tree limbs, and then I was using the power miter saw to actually cut different angle cuts. So I did like a 90-degree cut and then like a 10 to 15 degree. So I was able to make a diagonal, and then I sanded it with some sandpaper. If you have an electric sander, that works too. So you could see how I cut it down to size, and then with paint and paintbrushes, you can actually paint on it. So it actually turned out really nice. So that was the Woodland Creature Craft of 2017. Okay, to look at some resources to start your woodworking project, visit your local hardware store like Home Depot and Menards. Again, this is a good place to look for materials from wood to drills to saws to other type of tools, just to browse to get some ideas. Ask your family members. My dad and mom taught me a lot of skills about painting and woodworking. Even to this day, we're still working on projects together on all sorts of projects. So I thank them so much for helping me out, and it's a good family event. Check out some woodworking books at the library. A couple of ones that I come across: Woodworking Techniques and Projects for the First Time Woodworker by Kelsey John, Woodworking with Hand Tools, Tools, Techniques, and Projects, and Hand Tool Basics, Woodworking Tools and How to Use Them by Steve Brainham. So that's at the local library. And check the websites on the internet like YouTube, Google Images, and Pinterest. YouTube has a lot of different videos, so if you type in a project that you want to work on, they'll have some videos, for example, on birdhouses or building a wheelbarrow. Google Images, you get a lot of different pictures. And then Pinterest, a lot of different hobbies are posted here. I just type in the keyword woodworking, and then they bring up different projects that the community on the internet is working on. So you've got a lot of different people working in Pinterest. So those are just a couple resources you can look at. If you have any questions, you could also stop by the reference desk, and we'll be happy to research some additional resources. And thank you for coming to today's program. Stay tuned for future programs on social media like Facebook, YouTube channel, Instagram. Check out our website for updates. Check out our digital newsletter. And you have a good day.